Hello, how's it going? And a great day to you. I want to welcome you to this podcast. Today, we're going to have fun talking about trust and what trust really means for me, and likely what trust means for you. You see, trust is not soft, trust is actually strength. Trust is that thing that's kept me alive in the middle of combat as a pilot, as a mission commander. And trust, it's what keeps teams alive in business today. And perhaps you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you don't, strap in, stick around, and let's have fun talking about trust and and talk about the lessons that I've learned with trust over the course of my life and my career. Welcome to our podcast. My name is Jason Harris. I'm a pilot, I'm a speaker, I'm an executive coach, I'm a husband, I'm a father, and I am a student of life and leadership and this journey called life. Today, I want to have fun talking to you about trust and talking to you about what trust means to me and give you some lessons that I've learned over the course of my career when it comes to trust. So strap in and let's have fun talking about trust and what it really means. See, trust it's not soft. Is trust is like, when you think about it, it isn't a bonus. Trust is not a bonus. It's a baseline. Trust is something that is absolutely essential for us to go out there and execute the mission. What I realize is that every time that I go out and fly an airplane, every time when I was learning how to fly an airplane, that required trust. Every time that you walk onto an airplane as a commercial airplane passenger, that requires trust. And the same thing applies in business, the same thing applies in life. The foundation of what we do, it is all based in this idea and this concept of trust. You see, when I think about the cockpit, I think about this. Trust, it is assumed, but it's also constantly verified. When I talk about trust is assumed, it's constantly verified, the one thing that I love to tell people is this. In flying an airplane, I have actually shown up to the airplane, never having met another pilot on the crew. Sometimes it's just two pilots, sometimes it's three pilots, and sometimes it's four pilots. And I have shown up never having met another pilot. And the reality is that when we show up, we don't have to know each other, but we assume trust. Why is that? We're able to assume that level of trust because of the level of training that we've gone through. We're able to assume that level of trust based on having a standardized version of training. And so when I look at that other pilot, I know what they've gone through. And so it's easy for us to make that assumption to allow us to climb into that cockpit and get this aircraft started, get it pushed back from the gate, get it off the ground, and get passengers safely from point A to point B. And that is absolutely essential and critical when it comes to trust. The next thing in business, what I really tell people is that trust, it doesn't start with a title. You see, sometimes people, they say, oh, just trust me. And they think that because they have some title that somebody's just going to trust them. No, that title does not constitute trust. You have to give someone a reason to trust you. It's a little bit different in business than it is in that aviation world, depending on how your business is set up. Think about this. When I go in that airplane, I know that I have an inherent level of trust because I know the kind of training that person has gone through. When you are in that business, are there standardized versions of training? Are there standard methods for validating trust to validate that you know what that person is doing, that you know that that person has been qualified and checked out and verified and validated that they're going to execute the job, execute the mission the same way each time, based on standard operating procedures, based on a checklist. If you don't have that, which is what we rely on in commercial aviation, then you're missing a piece of that inherent level of trust. And so your trust in a corporate business environment, it has to start with your behaviors. You see, those behaviors, people are watching. And as they're watching those behaviors, it allows them to determine if they're going to even offer you any version or any level of trust. And so it's all about your behavior, right? And I'll just kind of sidestep here for a second. And there's these 7 skill sets that we always talk about. And I'll put in the show notes where you can get access to these 7 skill sets, where we really talk about these 7 critical skill sets to build a high performance team, a high trust organization. And the first thing we talk about is that professional knowledge, right? And when you have a level of knowledge, that sometimes will help in the behaviors that you exhibit within your organization. So, what kind of behaviors are you exhibiting, irrespective of whatever titles you might hold? And those will begin to dictate if someone's going to consider trusting you. And that trust, it actually goes both ways. If you are the frontline team member, or you're the supervisor or senior leader, whatever that is in that positioning in that hierarchy, that trust is a two-way street. And each person has to consider what their behavior is to determine what level of trust they're going to extend and what level of trust they're going to allow someone to gain with them or not. Another thing to think about is this: your people, they won't perform for someone that they don't believe has their back, right? When you believe someone has your back, that's actually a version of trust. In the military, we say this statement: I've got your six. And when I say I've got your six, that means I've got your back. And that means I know that when you're back there, you're watching my back, you're looking out for the threats and the targets that might be behind me. But let's actually take that into real working life in the workplace. Part of that establishing a level of trust and earning that level of trust is we have to know that someone has our back. And we have to know that they're going to help protect us, not for things that are wrong, not for things that are incorrect, not for things that are illegal, but just in the general sense of, do you have my back? Are you looking out for me, and are you looking out for my best interest? And are you looking out for the collective best interest? Or are you only looking at things that are pertinent to you? And are you only thinking about yourself? In the military environment, when we're flying airplanes, oftentimes we do these things called flying in formation. So when you're flying in formation, the lead airplane, they're looking out in front. They're scanning the things and the targets, and they're thinking about, hey, where do we need to fly to next? Do we need to go higher in altitude? Do we need to go left? Do we need to go right? Do we need to go lower? Whatever the case may be, that's lead's job, right? And they are leading the formation. And then that wingman, that person that's out there on that wing, they're watching the six of that lead aircraft. They're also scanning as well, but they don't see the bigger picture as far as all the other pieces, because they're busy focused on how do I stay in position and to make sure that I'm looking at this person's back to cover their six, right? So think about how that might apply to you within the workplace. What does that look like? Do you have people's backs? Do they have your back? And have you built that level of trust where they know they can trust you to have their back? If not, what can you do differently to show people that you're willing to have their back no matter what? That's powerful. And that's a foundational piece of how we build trust with other folks. The next thing is, trust, it's built in small moments, right? Um, and even before I get into that, talking about trust being built in small moments, one of the things that I want to make sure that I hit on when I talk about that foundation of trust is it's really this framework. When I talk about trust, it's this framework of trusted training, trusted processes that then allows you to empower and trust your people. Well, what does that look like for you on a personal level? What does that look like in your organization? What kind of framework do you all have for training? What kind of framework do you have when it comes to how you validate that training? What kind of framework do you have to ensure that you can test someone to make sure that they're able to execute the job? And then from there, that trusted processes. What's that framework look like? Do you have that framework in place to say, hey, I trust that they have the process and that they understand the process, to validate that they understand those processes, to validate that they understand those checklists and know how to use those checklists? Because it's not until you do those two things that you can then get to a level of empowerment. So I challenge you to think about what that looks like within your organization. And so the next thing that I was starting to get into is trust is built in these small moments. like there's these small incremental things that happen that allows us to build trust at a deeper level, right? It's this idea that it's not the town hall that builds the trust, it's how you respond to the hard questions afterwards, right? A lot of times we think, oh, in these big meetings we build the trust. No, like we can establish a foundation in these big meetings, we can establish a foundation in these town hall environments, but it's all of the actions, your behaviors, back to those behaviors, it's all of those actions that you do, and it's what do you do in those incremental small moments. What do you do when you're one-on-one? What do you do by yourself? When I attended the Air Force Academy, one of the things we always talked about were the Air Force's core values. And one of those core values is integrity first. And the idea of integrity is doing the right thing when no one is watching. And the proverbial example that we give that a lot of us, we hate it, right? But it made you really think about what does integrity means and what is that behavior or series of behaviors that you're executing no matter what. And the example that they would give would be at night when no one is looking and no one can see you, do you walk the path that you have to walk, which might take you longer? Or do you cut the corner and walk across the grass? No one will ever know. No one will ever see you. Which path are you going to take? And that will determine if you're operating out of integrity. I think the same thing goes for us in life, right? It's these small things that we do, and it's these behaviors, these repeated behaviors that are small, simplistic things, but they lead to significant consequences if we start piling on additional behaviors that are not conducive to building trust, not conducive to building a foundation of trust. So, what does that look like for you? What are those small things? What are those small behavioral modifications that you might need to make right now to help you be a better person, to help you build those bridges and bonds of trust, to help you build a foundation of trust that's built on your behaviors and it's built on integrity? And then, at the end of the next thing we talk about, right? Um, it, right? It's not that big vacation. It's not this big thing that we do that builds trust, right? I have a daughter. I have a 9-year-old daughter. She's 9 right now. And with my daughter, I realize that it's small incremental things that I do with her. With my wife, it's small incremental things that I do to build a level of trust and to build that foundation, keep building on it, right? And so some people, they'll do all of these things and they don't spend that quality time with that person, their child, with their significant other. And then they think that they're going to recapture and rebuy all of this time when they go on this big vacation. Wow, my family and I, we love to go on vacations and we try to do a few of them a year based on my daughter's spring break and fall break and summer break and, holiday break, whatever, right? But what I realize is that it's the little things that I do each day. It's that bedtime routine that I have with her. It's how I connect with her when I'm on the road, actually dealing with clients and doing the different keynote events. And how do I maintain that level of connection with her? That behaviors, those small, simple things that I do each time I'm on a trip. When I'm away and I'm on a trip somewhere in the morning time, I have an alarm set where I can make sure that I send her a note to say, hey, good morning, beautiful. Hope you have a great day, Munchkin. Be amazing, be thoughtful, be kind, be compassionate, and be brilliant, right? The little small things. It's when I am at home, the bedtime routine, when I tuck her in to do what to basically make sure that I spend that little small moment of quality time with her. It's those little small things in the morning when I get up with her and I make sure that I get her breakfast and drive her to school and drop her off. And on the way to school, we hang out, we listen to music, we have fun. It's those small things that make a difference that really builds the trust so that when we do get to the vacations, I'm not trying to build trust on the vacations. I'm actually gliding off of the trust that I've already built. And as a result, we're able to have that much more fun when we're out there having fun on vacation as a family. What are the behaviors that you're going to do? What are the behaviors that you can do? What are those things that you can do that you build trust incrementally with the people that matter the most for you? Whether it's your children, your significant other, the people in your workplace, your friends, and people that you say are special. It's those behaviors, it's those small incremental things that we do that allows us to build trust on a daily basis, on a regular basis, on a reoccurring basis. Doesn't take big things. It's these small, simple, incremental things that we do that allows us to build the trust that we need. So just remember, trust is built in these small moments. Um, you know, there are enemies to trust. There are two enemies to trust. One is micromanagement, and the other one is inconsistency. You know, people oftentimes they misunderstand this idea of micromanagement. You see, when you get into this idea of micromanaging, what ends up happening is actually what that's telling someone is, I don't trust you. Now, I am a big trust but verify kind of person. So I am all about this idea of trust but verify. However, that's distinctly different between micromanaging someone. So think about what, again, back to behaviors. What does that really look like? What are you doing with that person? What are you doing to that person? And how are you supporting them? And how are you ensuring that you give them that space and that you're not actually violating their trust and actually implementing one of those enemies of trust? And then inconsistency, right? It breeds anxiety. And this idea that ego, it suffocates trust, right? Micromanagement, what is that? That is control over connection. That's crazy to think about. Micromanagement, control over connection. Inconsistency, the safety has eroded, right? When you become inconsistent, people don't know if they can trust you to do the job. If I'm inconsistent with my daughter when I tell her I'm going to do something, she doesn't know if she can trust me the next time I tell her that I'm going to do something for her. The same goes for my wife, and the same goes in the workplace. How valuable is your word? How valuable is your word, and does it matter? Right? And then the ego, it gets in the way. Ego, that's self over service. Is your ego actually getting in the way of you being able to build trust with those around you, with those that matter to you? And this idea of the inconsistency thing, really, micromanagement, inconsistency, again, just a reminder, those are two things that are significant enemies of building trust. Think about when someone's been inconsistent with you. The first time it'll happen, you say, okay, great, I'm gonna see what happens. And then the second time it happens, and then the third time, it's now a trend. And you no longer have the ability to trust that they're going to do what they say they're going to do, because they have shown you not once, not twice, but three times that they are inconsistent and they are not able to live up to their word. For you, are you able to be consistent in your word? That is extremely important as we talk about how do we build trust. How do we build a culture of trust, right? Trust, it's a system, it's trained, it's repeated, it's felt. High trust teams, what they do is they train consistently, they communicate clearly, and they know why they matter, right? So let's start with that first one. Trust, it's a system. It's trained, it's repeated, it's felt. I'll go back to that example that I started with today. Flying the airplane, showing up, and I've never met that other pilot. The other pilot has never met me. We don't know anything about each other, but because we have a solid system of training, right? Because it's that way, we have the ability to trust each other. Because it's supported by our standard operating procedures, backed up by our checklist, that allows us to actually be able to trust each other. We can feel it. The interesting thing is, I've had these moments where I'm sitting in the cockpit and it's a pilot I've never flown with. And instantly, when they start running the checklist, I see them doing stuff, I can tell if I'm going to be able to really trust them or not. If they run the checklist, and it's mostly when I have a question about being able to trust them. And the reason why is because I can watch them going through their checklist, and if they do certain things incorrectly, out of order, that are inconsistent with our training, inconsistent with our standard operating procedures, inconsistent with our checklist, then I now have a feeling that says I'm going to have to watch this person. I now have a feeling to say, I don't know if I can trust this person. And once that happens, I am now actually on edge, have a little bit of anxiety to go, I wonder if there are any other things that they're going to do that are inconsistent. And if they're going to do anything else that's inconsistent, is it going to get in the way of safety? Now, think about that when it comes to your children. Think about that when it comes to your significant other. Think about that when it comes to people that you work with. Are your behaviors causing them to question you? Are other people's behaviors around you causing you to question what they might do? And then think about the system of your training. Is it framed in a systematic way that you have the ability, like I do as an airline pilot, to actually see and get that feeling of if I'm going to be able to trust this person or not? And if your training isn't set up that way, how do you create that training in that way? Right? And then high trust teams, they train consistently. In the airlines, we have consistent levels of training. We know that each year we're going to go through training. We know how many days we'll be in training. We know how the training is done. We know that every pilot that goes through our training to be qualified to fly a particular airplane, we know how many days of ground training they've done. We know what systems they had to learn. We know how many days of simulator training they had to go through. We know how many flights they have to fly when they go through initial operating experience. And there are all these things that are very systematic that we can look at that allows us to know what training they've done, that allows us to have that inherent level of trust. And teams, they communicate clearly. Communication is so powerful. In the study that I led with regards to trust and leadership in the workplace, the number one thing that stood out was communication. In my marriage, when we've had challenges and problems, guess what it came down to? It came down to communication. How did I communicate with my wife? How did she communicate with me? And how did we get better in our levels of communication? So I challenge you to think about communication, how you communicate with others, and what can you do to improve that level of communication? And then, at the end of the day, it goes back to, again, training, process, people, right? What does your training framework look like? What does your processes look like? And actually, when you look at those, are they actually empowering people, setting them up for success, or are they actually setting people up for failure? When you look at it from that perspective, it'll show you a lot about what you're getting in your organization and what levels of trust you have in your organization. Now, reflection plus action. So here's your challenge. I want you to think of one person on your team. When you think about that one person on your team, what's one thing that you can do this week to build more trust with them? I talked about consistency. I talked about your behavior, and I talked about I'm always looking at what can I do, and I want you to be thinking about this week. What is it that you can do to build trust with that one person? What are some behavior things you could do? What are some communication things that you could do? And just pick out that one person and think about what's one thing you can do this week that'll help you to build a better level of trust with them. If this hits home, folks, I'd appreciate if you like it, if you comment, if you share it. And especially if there's someone that you're trying to earn trust with, feel free to share with them. I want to say thank you for joining me on this journey as we talk about trust, as we talk about leadership, as we talk about life, and this journey of the human experience together. It's been a pleasure hanging out with you. I look forward to the next episode. Make sure that you stay tuned in. Next week, we're going to be talking about leader, manager, boss. We're going to be talking about what can we do to ensure that we're operating as a leader and leading people and earning our title of leader every single day. Blue skies, fair winds, and all the best.